I wanted to give a $5 million stock donation. How would I go about doing that?
The accounting department, the financial, dictate the vision of the church. That's a mistake.
If the pastor's not stewarding, nobody's stewarding.
Profit is not on our sheet.
Yeah.
Income so that we can do ministry.
You never get all the money you need for the entire project at the beginning. It's always a faith journey.
Well, Talking Church, I'm excited to sit down with our CFO, Steve Chaney. You work with many churches, but you also work with our church. And so we'll be talking a lot about finances. And before we do that, how did you get started into being a CPA, CFO? You work with, hundreds, thousands of churches now? Hundreds of churches now?
Yeah, over 1,100.
1,100.
That's what the company...
Not you personally.
Not me personally. I serve about 4 or 5. I call it 4 plus. But no, how I got started was literally... the pastor at our church at the time was praying over things to go over, and I was working at a bank position, and the bank CEO met with me one day, and he goes, "You should be a CPA." He goes, "You have that type of, you're into numbers and things," and it was great. And we had a big service one night, and I went to the altar and prayed over me, and literally Leroy Lebec is the one who prayed over me and said, "God, make him your CPA."
Wow.
And that was part of the journey. Finished my college degree. I was actually going to be a chemistry major. I switched majors on my 3rd year of college. So I finished the entire upper division of college in 13 months, 57 units.
Wow.
And started at Arthur Anderson, and that started the journey. But I still played the piano for churches, for my church.
You're a very good piano player.
Oh, thank you. And it was a very large church at the time. And so one day the pastor came to me and goes, "Didn't you just become CPA?" And I go, "Yeah." And he said, "Well, we need a CPA on the board." And I said, "I'm 26 years old." And he goes, "Oh, you play all the hymns. Don't worry, they'll vote for you." So sure enough, I got elected on the board, sat there for 1 year and just listened, and then became the treasurer after that first year. And the Holy Spirit spoke to me and said, "You're going to do outsourced accounting for churches in the future." And I was like, "No, I work at Arthur Anderson." And Arthur Anderson obviously shut down in near May of 2002 is when I started the business. And it's 2002. And it's been a journey ever since. I gave myself 3 months to see if it would work. And in 3 months had 10 churches, and now over 20 plus years, have over 1,100.
It's amazing. And you've obviously learned a lot along the way, starting off on the board at 26 and now, again, having these 1,100 churches. And so our goal today is to talk about 6 big mistakes or things that often churches overlook when it comes to their finances. And maybe those who are leading that are listening to this, maybe it's lead pastors, maybe CFOs, maybe executive pastors, or even pastors that are getting started that would like to learn these mistakes from others rather than learn the mistakes themselves. There's probably church plants that are saying, okay, how do I manage this stuff? And hopefully this can be a resource for people who are, like us. I can tell you we've probably done every one of these mistakes. This is our 30th year of a church, and we've probably done them all. So none of this is to make people feel bad or to shame them. It's to help them. But I can imagine there will be some groans and some nods from people when they're listening to this, realizing that, we maybe are making that mistake right now, or we have made that mistake in the past. So I want to start with mistake number 1, and that is relying on outdated or inefficient financial systems. I feel like churches in general just get this bad rap. We saw in the federal government at the beginning of this year of, the retirement plan is all in paper and it's in Iron Mountain and they have to do it on carts and get it back and forth. So there's some archaic systems in our federal government, but I would say churches probably would be known to have even worse systems. Are there any things that particular jump out at you at things where you've started working with the church and said, you'd still do it that way?
Oh, for sure. I just literally had an example of this happen the other day where I was meeting with the church and going over just some ideas. Some of the times I do what we call discovery calls or just understanding where a church is at. And they found out that they still do not offer direct deposit at the church. So I asked them to the system, and I said, "Well, did you see that one button that said you click the button and it's go direct deposit?" And they were like, "Well, yeah, we did, but we just didn't know what that did." And so they literally still print off all the checks, hand them out to employees. The treasurer has to come, sign the checks. hand them out. I mean, it's just so inefficient for the employees. You think about the time that's incurred for every person to go to the ATM or go inside their bank, sign the check, get it direct deposited. You're wasting literally hours upon hours, and in a year, maybe hundreds of hours of wasted time that could be put back into ministry. It's quite amazing. But it was just sort of like a light popped on, or like, oh, we didn't know we could do that. Even to the point of like paying their federal income taxes or the federal taxes on the payroll. The bookkeeper was going down to the bank and making a federal tax deposit form that you literally go to your bank, the IRS can accept that and pay the payroll taxes. That was gone away in like early 2000s, late 1990s. I mean, crazy. Like, just the people are still doing this, but it's just an awareness thing. It's like we get used to doing things that way, like printing off paper. Everything should be digitized. A check request from going from the desk level, what I call the desk, to the director, the board of directors, board of trustees, whatever you call them, deacons, from the desk all the way to there. It's all automated. Everything. So we see a lot of those kind of things, and it's just, you always find it's just amazing what happens. We found this one church recently who had an internal website, and so I would have to get through to them remotely through like a PC to go anywhere, whatever. But I found out that during certain times of the day that their Wi-Fi or their broadband was so slow that they would have to shut down everything so nobody could have any internet access while they did sort of a live feed on this webinar that they were running. And I was like, wow.
Like dial-up.
Dial-up. It was almost like a dial-up connection. I was like, wow, this is crazy, with Starlink or SpaceLink, whatever, all that kind of stuff that you can just get for like $100 a month. And it's like just an awareness, right? It's just amazing.
When technology is changing so fast, and I mean, you mentioned Starlink and AI and all these tools that are making things more efficient. I mean, even this year, it's kind of the year of AI where it's really pushing things forward. I imagine even some of the things we talk about today will get more efficient, better, easier.
Yeah.
I think of, I had a friend and he said that every single expense needed to be approved by the financial manager before the expense happened, to the point of cups of coffee. So you needed to go, if you knew you had a coffee meeting later that week with someone in the church and you were planning on paying for their coffee, you needed to go to that financial manager at the beginning of the week, get her to approve that, to give you either a temporary card or cash to approve just a simple expense. Now, obviously, we want financial accountability. Obviously, we don't want people. I mean, there were reports of churches a few years ago that kind of had debit cards or like Visa gift cards that they would give out to people and use. And I mean, it's like that is the opposite of what we're trying to do.
Yeah.
But if everything is hindered by that, I mean, the point of it is that ministry's hindered. If all we're doing is administration and all we're doing is all of these menial tasks and taking care of receipts and doing this, and well, that takes care of, or that could take hours, 10 hours, 20 hours a week.
Right.
For your pastors. You want them pastoring people. You want them out ministering. You want them to be in the community. And so ultimately, these tools and these outdated things are taking away from real ministry.
For sure.
So we've talked about the bad. Now, what are some of the, tech stack is kind of the terminology that a lot of people use. What are the tools that you recommend that you see churches that are efficient, that are quick, but also accurate and transparent? What are some of the tools that you would recommend for people when it comes to softwares and other tools that they can utilize to get out of their archaic system and be efficient?
Absolutely. Well, there's two things that I always say that a church has to have in its system. And technology is redefining the entire way we do everything, right? Obviously, what you just mentioned. So there's a church management software system that people refer to as CHMS, donor management system. You'll hear it. A lot of those are like Planning Center, Tithely, a lot of those type of things. But what's the key takeaway from that is not really per se what you use, but it's having a platform that's on web, that's on the internet. It's not a local server. So you want to have a donor management system. You want to have a ability to connect to your donors, as well as the volunteers, the music department, all how you organize your whole Sunday program. All of that is automated today. So you're not sitting here filling out forms. You're not doing like check request forms. You're not doing all of these forms that, like, how do you get, like, even registering for kids camp is all automated, right? So now you can serve more kids, right? You can take care of all of their emergency request forms and all of this other information. So that's one you have to have. And then the other side is the financial side. There's a lot of great web-based systems that are very inexpensive. That, again, technology has brought the cost down, right? So there's a per usage or per organization fee, and we use a system called Xero. There's also QuickBooks.
Starts with an X, right?
Yeah, xero.com. That's what we use at our firm for all of our churches, no matter the size. So you have the church plan who's just starting up, getting ready to do a launch, and you have the river values of the year of the marketplace. We do Xero for all of that. We love that system. It's unlimited users. We won't get into all the specifics, but that's the kind of stuff you want to think about. So you have to have finances, and you got to have the donor management system. But you don't want to have what I call, like, in your wheelhouse, you don't want to have one software that just controls everything, because you want the best of breed. Like, you want the best in accounting. You want the best in donor management. You want the best in like credit card or spend management is now the new term people call it. So you can have multiple types of spend management, right? You can say where they get a live check, they get an ACH, or they get a credit card payment. It's all spend management now. And that's the other thing that you want to do. So your spend management, automating that so that people can submit things electronically, right? So when a volunteer at a small church plan or whatever it is, they all have volunteers. They need to get reimbursed for some things, right? They might buy water. They can just go online and submit that. Then it goes through the whole approval process. Now, instead of doing things for 10 hours or 20 hours a week, or waiting till the end of the month and then financials are done even later. No. You're just like literally within minutes, the whole entire thing is done. Like, could you imagine? But that's where we are, right?
Yeah.
So it's a beautiful thing. That's what we're doing. And then, of course, payroll. Payroll is one of the biggest things. I know we're going to talk a little bit more about that with Pitfalls, but like, why do you want to assume all the risk when you can have software companies that provide the software to you? You can run it yourself, and then you offload all the risk to them of paying the taxes, of filing everything. And of course, what technology and platforms that do that have brought the cost way down. And then if you work with like a firm like ours, we even get a wholesale pricing on that we pass through to our clients. So it's quite amazing. So then everything that a pastor is worried about. So like what I always say this about technology and about what a pastor is. Pastor never went to Bible college to say, I want to be an accountant. They went to the altar just like I did. I'm sort of weird. I went to the altar to get prayed.
You went to the altar and it was
prayed.
Be a CPA.
Yeah, be a CPA, because a mentor told me I should do that, right? And I was like, that's pretty cool. But a pastor was led of the Lord to go to Bible school, become a pastor. He didn't think like, oh, I also got to have payroll class. I got to have all this other stuff. But guess who's responsible? The pastor. The pastor is responsible for all this. And I heard recently a guy spoke about this. And he was like, if the pastor is not worshiping, right? It doesn't matter if the worship pastor is worshiping, because if the pastor is not worshiping, nobody's worshiping. So if he's not having his moment in the background worshiping, right? And it's like, I feel like the same way. If the pastor's not stewarding, nobody's stewarding. Mm-hmm. Does it make sense?
Yeah.
But we got to bring in the systems in place to allow them to steward. We call it the 4 R's, getting the right information to the right person at the right time to make the right decision. And if all of that's in place with the right system, you'll get it, and it's instantaneous.
Yeah, no, that's very good. When it comes to those tools, things that I use pretty much every week is, I don't use Xero very much. You and Carla and our team would use that, managing it. Again, as a pastor, just for those who are listening, okay, well, what do you use? We use Divvy, which was bought by Bill.com. And so now what do they call it? Spend and expense, or?
It's called Bill, Spend, and Expense. And I'm an old guy, and I still call it Divvy.
Yeah, but
So
I mean, the cards still
it's
say
still
Divvy on
Divvy.
it. But that tool, basically, it was such a good tool that Bill was like, we got to buy this before it outgrows us and
Correct. Yeah.
kills us. But we use that every single day. That's for tracking expenses, for receipts, tied to all those different expenses. You can also do reimbursements in that
Correct.
as
You
well.
can.
And then we also use Approval Max, where that's for like bigger requests, like check requests that are sent out.
Yeah. Larger ones where a vendor doesn't want to accept a credit card payment.
Right.
But ultimately, Approval Max is a purchase order system. Now I'm getting a little bit of business terminology there. What's a purchase order? In the church world, a purchase order is really just a check request system. Remember when you used to say, like, I need a check, and you'd fill out a request and say, pay vendor ABC for this, and here's their bill. That's a purchase order.
And I'm seeing that more and more people are throwing fees on top of, credit card transactions and stuff. So like some of our vendors have said, hey, we'd prefer checks now. So we are doing, like, a number of our vendors, we are doing checks, but I would say still most things are done through Divvy and cards, like, and it's a lot easier that way.
Yeah. If the vendor ever says to you they're going to add on a fee, then you don't want to pay them with a credit card. You want to pay them with a check or like an ACH. Okay. That's our recommendation. Otherwise, you want everything to go through a credit card because you get all the protections of a credit card. Fraud protection, you get points, you get everything. Plus, with Divvy, it ties immediately to the budget. So therefore, now let's say a person gets $1,000 a month to spend. Once they spend $100, now they only have $900 left. And guess what? It's right on your iPhone or your Android. It's real-time information. Again, the 4 R's, right? You're getting the right information, right person, right time, make the right decision. Now, a little bit more step of the tech stack. So what we're talking about, a lot of this is called SaaS, software as a service. But now there's a new thing coming out, and it's really fresh. It's called banking as a service. It's called BaaS. And a lot of churches pay a lot of analysis fees or monthly bank fees, right, for transaction processing because they clear a lot of checks. And there's a per check fee that banks won't tell you they charge when you scan in a check and you deposit it. They're going to charge you money for that. Or when you do a wire, it's like $39 to do a wire, or to receive a wire, it's $20. I mean, there's all these fees that come into it. Now, guess what? Banking as a service, you can get these online banks that are absolutely free. There's no transaction fees. So literally now what we've done at River Valley is we have a checking account for every one of our campuses. All the ACHs, if the vendor doesn't take a credit card, we set them up with ACH payment. But now we can track immediately what every campus is charging against. All of our wires now to all of our missionaries are free. So now we've taken our analysis fees to virtually zero. It's quite amazing. And, we use a service here at River Valley called Relay Financial. And if you want to have help setting that up, contact us. We'll help you. We'll give you the ideas because what we want to do is we want to bring back more money out of administration. We want to put it into ministry. We want to take more time that you're spending on administration, put it into ministry. That's what all this tech stack is about. And I always say this to my staff. Right now, this is what we do, but technology is growing. And in 5 years, we might not do any of this technology. We'll do new technology because we want to do what's best for the church.
And I'm a believer that a lot of this is going to move into blockchain. I know it's a little bit early probably for churches, but I sent a wire yesterday and it was the most painful thing ever. And I paid $30. I'm like, and I literally asked them, I'm like, do you take crypto? Because I can send this to you in 20 seconds. And so I know.
So that was personally you did that.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I didn't send a wire on behalf of the church.
Because I was going to say we would be for free.
No. Personally, I did it. But I do think that, again, I don't think people need to worry too much about it today, but I do think that blockchain is going to integrate itself. If the central banks and if all the big banks let them, the technology is far better. I mean, I do it all the time. It's so easy to transfer things. And so I'm looking forward to that day, although I do think we're probably a little bit far off from most organizations adapting it. We're only at one Mistake one. So we gotta hustle. No, it's
Sorry.
my fault. I'm supposed to be keeping us going. The mistake two kind of lends into the first one, but poor spend management and lack of expense controls. We kind of talked about this with Divvy a little bit, but can you expand on how? I mean, there was a time period where we were reimbursing every staff. We said you just use your personal credit cards or personal debit cards or whatever you use, and we'll reimburse you those expenses, and you have to submit them. I mean, it was total chaos. It was absolute chaos. And, the books were closed late, and it was crazy. And so when you came in, you were like, yeah, we're not going to do that.
No.
But I feel like a lot of churches do that. Talk about maybe some of those things when it comes to spend management, when it comes to those tools, receipts. Again, we can get more into Divvy being that tool, but I think there are a lot of people that still find themselves behind. I talk to churches all the time where they are just frustrated by their systems. I'm like, well, everyone seems to really like ours. So
yeah, for sure. The ultimately, and River Valley at the time when I first came in here was very typical church, right? And ultimately, there's a little bit more to it than that. We used to have 2 credit card systems here at the church. And when those credit card systems would hit their max, we would pay them off. And then they would max out again, but you could only make 2 payments in a month. So then we would move to, once the credit cards were fully maxed out twice in a month, then we would move to personal reimbursements. And then we would just reimburse everybody. And then the books would be closed 10 to 15 days after the next month. And then everybody would find out how they are actual versus budget. But the credit card was only being used when you hit the credit limit. Everybody's like, okay, let's go to the second credit card. Okay, now let's go to the personal card. So
some people manage their personal finances that way.
That's true. And now the one thing about it is we would always pay it off.
Yeah.
So we weren't paying interest costs. But
Right.
I do remember when we went to Divvy. So Divvy, we use Divvy here at River Valley, and we love Divvy. It's a great system. By the way, it's free. It's unlimited cards.
Which, by the way, how is it free? Like, how do they make money? Is there
So there's a merchant fee that they charge. So when somebody says they pay the merchant fee,
like the card, like the Visa fee, they have a little.
So when
bit
you
on it.
go to the like Home Depot and you scan that card in, and Home Depot receives that $100, let's say, they only receive like $97.50.
Right.
There's $2.50 in there. Probably Visa gets $1. Divvy probably gets $1.50. I don't know the
Sure.
breakdown, but that's how they get
Got
paid. So they get paid based on how many times you swipe your card, right? They want to encourage you to swipe your card, but the budget controls it. So here's what you can do in the system, which is so great. You have a credit card system, and here's the other thing about credit cards that pastors don't know. Most of the time, a pastor is signing up a credit card system for the church, and they're doing their own Social Security number, and they're taking all the risk for the church because they're not a big enough corporation that then they qualify as a corporate card, right?
Right. So they're doing it. It's tied in their personal name.
Guess what? Divvy, no personal credit, no personal Social Security number at all for the pastor to fill that out. And it's all issued on credit from bill.com.
But it feels to me more like a debit card too.
It's it totally acts
like
a
I
debit
know
card.
there is the credit component to it,
Yeah.
but like every different department, you can say this is how much you can spend, and you can see every individual team member again on the app. I mean, I rarely will go on the desktop site. It's fine to use, but I'll just do basically everything on my phone, and I can see my whole team, what they've spent money. I see every single budget. I can transfer funds to somebody. Hey, I'm running out to do, to an event. Could you put $500 on my card for those expenses that we're doing? Great. I mean, it's real time happening. And some people who have had that, they're like, yeah, isn't this normal? I mean, you see it all around. The amount of churches that don't have anything close to this is huge. And even businesses, like sometimes the people from the church are like, that was so easy. You did that right then. Yeah, it's really simple. So if you hate your receipt system or you hate your budgeting system, again, ever since we switched, I've been like, this is so much simpler in terms of tracking and allowing people to have expenses. You can even have volunteers that have cards. Some churches might want to do that. Other churches might not. But you could say, no, it has zero money on it until I add it.
Yeah, you have to add that. You add it to the budget, and then that person has an ability to spend something, right?
And you can take it away, freeze it.
Or if you wanted to do name every dollar,
right?
That's a Dave Ramsey thing. But you can actually say you have to request it. And then when they request it, it immediately pops on their card. They literally could be standing at a cash register and I say, I need to by the way, that shows how old I am that I would actually say a cash register.
Sure.
So they can literally request funds right there while they're in line. And when it pops up on somebody's phone, oh, they just requested funds, approve. It's on their. It's on
Much
their card.
easier than going into someone's office and getting
Correct. At the beginning of the week,
at the
right?
beginning of the week.
That's crazy, but that is very true. And by the way, I will tell you this: out of all the tech stack that we have at our firm, my clients will tell you that's the biggest game changer.
100%.
100%, everything.
Totally agree.
Uh-huh.
And I think a lot of that is because most pastors, they're good at preaching, they're bad at receipts, they're
Mhm.
bad at expense management. I know, my dad has said that. He's like, I'm not gifted in that area, but that's why having people that can help us and know what they're doing. One thing that I would say is a point that often gets brought up, and this is probably a philosophical thing, but how often are you reaching out to people who don't get receipts in? I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of financial managers listening to this, or pastors or executive pastors, or even lead pastors that go, my team is not submitting receipts. What is our policy and how quickly? I mean, we'll say if you don't get your receipts in, your card's going to be frozen. What is our process for that in terms of making sure people get those in? And then if you can share a little bit of the why behind that, rather than just being a iron-fisted leader that wants them to get the receipts in fast.
Sure. Well, part of the application that you use to track those, it's easy right there. You put the location or the campus, the department, the account code, description, and then let's say you're out to dinner, before the person brings your card back after processing it, your iPhone will chirp to say you can take a picture of it immediately right there. So there's no need to delay. Here's why we want to keep those cards or keep all that reconciled, because we reconcile those credit card systems twice a week. And here's why. Because we have a work process, a workflow that, and I say it like this: deposits go in Tuesday or Monday or Tuesday. We reconcile those. We pay bills Wednesday, Thursday, whenever, sometimes Tuesday, Thursday, twice a week, typically for larger churches, once a week for smaller churches. And then we upload and reconcile the credit cards weekly and the bank accounts. And here's why: because the pastor needs to know, what is my free cash? What's my available funds outside of designated funds, right? And I always say it this way in a funny way, because he needs to know how many times to hand around the buckets on Sunday, right? We're going to hand around the buckets twice this week because it's a little bit of low. And so anyways, that's why we want to do it. So our system is, 1 strike, 2 strike, 3 strikes. Right. And we say, hey, first strike is you're sort of getting a warning. And the warning is typically from one of my staff people. There's an email. By the way, it's all automated right in the app. And it'll say, hey, can you get this in by the end of business tomorrow? Okay.
Yeah, I always get emails from your son. And
yeah, my son will send that.
Logan, you need to get your transactions in.
That's true. And then at the end of the month, you'll typically get one from me.
Yep.
All right. And then our person here on site is Carla. She would be like the on-site bookkeeper of a church. She's our financial manager in this regard. And she'll go in and start locking people out. I don't do the locking out because I want to be the sort of good cop, bad cop. But and then if you get 2 strikes and then you're on the third one, at River Valley, what we do is make by the third strike, and this is like, now you're really late. You're not only 2 weeks late, you're probably 3 weeks late. Now you're probably into the next month. You actually have to go to meet with one of our XPs, and you have to understand that it's a privilege to hold a credit card of a church, that it actually requires stewardship. And you need to acknowledge that. And if you acknowledge that, then we'll turn your card back on. But understand, you've already been warned twice, typically during the week. You've been every week, right? And then you've been warned at the end of the month. So again, our firm has automated all of these processes, but it's also built into the app. And then we've also automated things on Google Workspace on this as well. So that's the joy of working with the firm.
Yeah.
So,
and you get to be the bad guy in some senses, and then
mm-hmm.
Carla can be the bad guy in others. Mistake number 3 is mishandling payroll and housing allowance. I have a funny story about this. I won't name who this is, but someone on our staff saw the self-employment allotment. So for those who are unaware, pastors are taxed as self-employed when it comes to Social Security. And so they end up paying the full, 15.3%. They end up paying that full amount. Now, for some churches, they'll actually end up providing that like as a benefit to say, hey, we'll help pay this like a normal employee would, but they're not legally required to. I'm articulating that correctly?
Yes.
So one of our staff members, they didn't know what that allotment was for, which was for the Social Security tax. They just thought it was an extra kind of part of their paycheck, and they didn't really ask questions. And whoever their tax person was didn't catch that either. And so for about 5 or 6 years, they were not paying that portion of the Social Security. And it ended up being about like $20,000 that they ended up owing in back taxes because of that. And so those are some mistakes that people make when it comes to payroll, when it comes to Social Security, when it comes to housing allowance. Are there others that you can think of or expansions on those that you think are strong warnings that you'd give to churches?
Well, a lot of pastors still think that they should get a 1099. And the Supreme Court ruled on that many years ago that no, a minister is considered dual status, meaning self-employed as well as an employee. So therefore they get a W-2, but then no Social Security nor Medicare taxes to be withheld because they're self-employed. But a church can still withhold the self-employment tax for a minister, but it's called additional dollars to withhold. It's in box 2 if you want to get a little geeky on the W-2. It's box 1 is your regular salary. Box 2 is the withholding on federal income tax, but you can over withhold. And then in box 14 is your housing allowance. Now, box 14, putting the housing allowance there is optional. You don't have to put it in there because guess what? Box 14 in the W-2 doesn't go to the IRS or the Social Security Administration. It's literally only information for the pastor. And so a lot of people will tell me, oh, that's not taxable. Well, yeah, for ordinary income tax, but self-employment tax is, and that's payroll tax. You'll hear it called that. It's Social Security, Medicare tax. So ministers pay both sides, where like a non-minister employee, the employer, the church pays half, the employee pays the other half. And so a minister can really get hurt. There's also a funny story I have with this. So there's statute of limitations. When you have that much tax understated, there's no statute of limitations, meaning the IRS can go back as far as they want. Okay. And if you say, I don't have all the information, I lost it all, that's okay. We'll subpoena the bank and we'll get the records and we'll just tax all your income. Okay. And so I had a pastor do this. They went back 31 years. And the pastor was like, how am I going to pay this? We're talking about not 20,000. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars because it adds up over time. And then the interest and penalty on top of that. And he's like, what am I going to do? And I said, well, we're going to get a payment plan for $100 a month. And when Jesus comes, you're going to stop paying. You're literally going to pay this the rest of your life until it's paid off. And they can do that. So this is so easy to do. Now, the other reason why you want to do a W-2 in this regard is because there's all these other special things that happen, right? Like Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act, right? Especially in California, we've been working with some churches to show how, because housing allowance isn't counted for income for the income levels to get the subsidy, where now ministers are literally getting free health care because it lowers their income. Now that applies to the state you're at, there's a lot of rules to that. But if you got a 1099, guess what? You don't even qualify. Got a W-2, now you do, right? So there's things like that we've been working through with churches to help them. So there's many reasons why you got to get payroll right. There's other reasons why you should be doing your 403B, your retirement, things like this, so it would help you.
What percentage of church, just kind of off the top of your head, would you say do contribute into 403Bs versus they don't provide any additional? Like for us at River Valley, we provide a match for people. Would you say most churches do that? Most churches don't do that?
The majority of churches do not contribute anything to your 403B. Now, what do I mean by that? They'll allow a minister to contribute on their own, but they won't match it.
Yeah.
Other thing too is this is a best practice on the self-employment tax. So we recommend that a church treat a minister at least like a non-minister, like match half of it. That's what you call this self-employment contribution. We call it like a self-employment allowance. Like we add on 7.65, 15.3 divided by 2, 7.65%. We add that onto the payroll because guess what? That's a taxable benefit to the minister. So you pay tax on tax, but it helps. So I don't want to get too into the weeds with that, but like churches should do this because a minister is already really not making their market value. And it's you just do small amounts over time, and it adds up.
When it comes to ministers and retiring, I saw a stat from just the Assemblies of God, the denomination that we're a part of. The median age of a minister is 58. The median age.
Yeah.
So it's aging. That's up 4 years from, I think, 5 years ago. It's now 4 years older. So ministers are getting older. Now, that's probably pretty common across other denominations as well. But when you look at that, there's a lot of ministers that struggle to retire, and they are maybe holding on to the church longer than maybe they should, or they should transition into a different role, maybe still staying as a pastor, but not being the lead pastor. Is there, I mean, again, you work with a lot of churches. Do you see that? What are some other benefits? You mentioned the helping take care of that Social Security. You mentioned 403B. Are there other things that churches should be aware of? I know probably most people listening to this are pastors, not boards.
Sure.
But I do think that there are a lot of pastors that they have really good hearts, and they go, well, no, I don't want to take very much money, and I don't want to, I kind of have this vow of poverty mindset. But then their church is strong, is hung up by the pastor can't retire,
Right.
and they don't want to not help them retire. So, I mean, there's kind of this dance and balance there. What is kind of your advisement to boards and churches to how to take care of a pastor if maybe they haven't started and the pastor is in their 50s, and how do you catch them up? It's kind of a specific question, but I feel like as I look at churches, that's a growing problem, that they love their pastor, but they don't necessarily love their pastor financially.
Yeah, it's true. There's quite a few things that you can do in that regards. And by the way, we do work with a lot of pastors to organize this. I was just working with a pastor in Northern California area, working on this kind of stuff with his retirement planning. First of all, there's two things that I would take away to set the sort of the plane right with this. Pastors want to put the budget of the church on their shoulders. And when they don't feel like the church can afford it, they're like, well, I'll just sacrifice. And then there's the board members or the leadership who never attended a church and decided to become a member of a church and say, I want to be a board member and I want to define the salary package of my pastor. It's very difficult, right? That's a difficult thing. So when a person becomes a member of a church, gets on the board, and then all of a sudden now they're responsible for the pastor's retirement. Well, what are you talking about? I don't know anything about this. So you got to get an advisor. You got to get somebody who's going to help you speak about these things and how to fund them, right? And there's ways to go about it. So like that example I gave you of the law change, like when Obamacare first came into effect. And I call it Obamacare. I don't mean that offensively, but it's just the Affordable Care Act. Everyone said Obamacare. That's why you did it. But that's neither here nor there.
You're Californian.
I'm California. It's all there. So ultimately, back in those days, they were giving 25% credit to people who would fund medical retirement or medical expense. Well, a church who's not taxable, where do I apply for this? Guess what? That's what we do for a living, Chaney and Associates. You literally just file 990 and you put it on this one thing and you got this money back. Now that's been phased out. But now they've changed the rules. So now a minister's house allowance doesn't qualify. So what we're saying, wait a second, you qualify for all the money. So you can still keep your medical plan, doesn't change. You get to do all this. But guess what? The money that the church was spending now can go to your retirement. So it doesn't increase their budget, right? But you got to have that advisor. You got to know, because people just do not go and say, I'm going to specialize in pastoral taxation. It's very complicated. They're self-employed. ERISA rules, which are like labor law rules of like for retirements, you can't, like my company cannot discriminate, but a church can, because they're self-employed ministers and there's the non-minister, right? So it's different rules, and you can utilize those rules to help the minister. That's what you want to do. So when they retire, you want to make sure that they get their Social Security benefits, their Medicare benefits. Those are huge. The Medicare benefits are the biggest. You want to make sure the minister gets enough quarters, and then the Social Security. But then you can also add in annuity payments that are guaranteed, right? And there's a life insurance, so then it becomes non-taxable again. You can use a 403B to also get house allowance. So if you lower the tax burden, you get a lot more retirement Does it make sense?
Right,
Because you're
exactly.
not depleting it.
Yeah, and a
So
lot of
again,
that stuff can happen without even hitting like the bottom line, so to
yeah.
speak.
But what I find is this is a firm like ours is the best friend to a minister because we actually bring this up to board members. We start talking about this. They're like, well, wait, we've never talked about this, but we love our pastor. We want to do something, right? We don't want them hurting. And then that's what happens. There's no golden parachute at the end. So a minister just stays on. They're 70, 74, 76, right? They're, and they've not transitioned it because they can't afford to bring other staff on because they've not done it. So what happens is if their salary is going up, but then the contributions of retirement starts to go up and their salary goes down. So then they can bring other people on
Right.
to do a proper transition.
For two more questions on this,
Yeah.
and then I want to move on to the next one. One is from a payroll, from a technology perspective. Do most of your churches use a certain payroll system, or would you say it's pretty wide across the board
You
on
have to
what
be
they use?
careful about that. I won't name the companies not to use.
Sure.
Okay. But you have to be careful about that because great looking softwares are not always the best. Okay. There's a software out there right now that's telling you like housing allowance, how to report it, and it's completely incorrect.
Hmm.
So it's going to hurt the minister. The one we use is ADP Run. It's a great software system. People love it. Of course, any system that is they cut 25% of all checks in America. It's a huge system. The whole entire ADP company. That's what we use, and we get the wholesale pricing so that we pass through to our churches. It's amazing. But they do everything correctly.
Right.
And so sometimes a person just wants us to set it up for them and they run it, and that's fine too as well.
And then my last question on this is there a technology expense or a recurring expense that you see a lot of churches are wasting money on? Like there's and don't say Slack because I love Slack, so
Oh,
don't
really?
don't tell me that Slack is that. But is there like a theme of things where you feel like people they haven't updated their technology in a while and they're just still paying and they're kind of getting robbed by these organizations? Is there something that comes to mind right away where you feel like people are a lot of churches you find are wasting money when you kind of get into their financials and realize, why are you spending so much money on that? Technology has made that way cheaper.
Correct. A lot of it's phone systems, backup systems. All of that is gone. It's dead. Um, you can easily get a phone system like Grasshopper. It's so simple. Unlimited extensions. You pay for like the amount of minutes used, but like people are using their cell phones now to call out. It's only people calling in. Unlimited everything. And I think our entire company pays about $45 a month for that. I mean, and we have how many clients, how many employees? So that's one I would recommend that we use a lot of. Another thing is just going through all your subscriptions and finding out what do I use, what I don't use. We went to one church, they were paying $1,400 a month for a subscription for a backup service. We called the backup service. They're like, yeah, you actually never backed up anything. So it was a great idea when they thought they needed it, but then they weren't actually ever using it. And the guy was like, well, we were always wondering why you
Yeah,
ever
$20,000 saved. Yeah.
right there immediately,
Yeah.
right? If you're like literally our software for River Valley, a mega church, multi-site for accounting is $47 a month, unlimited users
For the software, for the accounting software.
for the accounting software. $47 a month. I literally go into some churches and they're paying $100,000 a year for a software, and I won't name the name, that we literally could replace in a heartbeat for $47 a month.
Wow.
Okay. So just things like that. Like if you have a server on site, like for an email server or a data file server, it's a waste of money. Google Workspace, a church can get it for free. It's like virtual. It's everything's done. It's in the cloud. They're like, oh, but is this secure? Well, it's more secure than at your location because your location is probably more likely going to burn down and nothing's going to be backed up properly. And Google has it in all data centers. So those are the type of easy things to do that are just, and by the way, IT companies hate me saying this because you don't need an IT company. You only need an IT person to keep up your routers and like your Wi-Fi hotspots. Everything else is just really a waste.
Yeah, good perspective, and we obviously love saving money. This one kind of goes more into the the giving side of things.
Yeah.
Mistake number 4, too many ways to give. It sounds counterintuitive because no, we want to provide as many ways. You know, you have the kiosks in the lobby, you have online platforms, you can give here, you can give there, you can do Venmo, you can do Zelle, you can do PayPal, you can do events, you can do all these different things. I think on the surface, again, people would say, well, why is that a bad thing? But it maybe ends up confusing people.
Yeah. I always say less is more. That's the old saying, right? And so in this regards, I feel like you should give every option of the type of transaction you're looking for. Meaning, if someone wants to pay with credit card, ACH, but that's all in one system. Track it in one system. Why? Because when you get that data all together in one spot, it becomes extremely powerful. But what I find is a lot of churches are trying to patch this in, patch that in, do this. Oh, this person wants to give me this way. And it's like, whoa, I've got data everywhere. And now it's all chaos, right? You want to bring it into that central hub of information. Again, that donor management system, that platform, there's many out there that you can use. We're sort of agnostic about that.
Yeah.
But like, that's what you want to have. Now, when you start talking about credit cards or ACH or checks or like stock or crypto, now you're starting to say, okay, that's a type of currency. And I want to make sure I can accept a currency.
Right. So you're saying you don't need 6 different ways to pay with a debit card.
Correct.
You need one. You don't need, 5 different ways to transfer to bank. You need one, versus, you need a way to receive crypto. You need a way to receive ACH. You need a way to receive assets. And for stocks, I think that's something that a lot of people are missing. I mean, there's billions of dollars. It might even be trillions of dollars now in donor advised funds that are already, the tax burden has already been taken out from wealthy individuals that have put money in donor advised funds. They have to legally give it to a charity.
Yeah.
But it's probably going to be in stock.
Correct.
And so as a church, you've got to be prepared to receive stock. Using that as an example, I mean, crypto, there's a number of different ones of different tools, in Given and Overflow and others that depending on pricing, looking at that. But I think for the most part, you just need something. But for stock, I think that's one that if you're not prepared on how to handle it, how would you advise most churches prepare to receive stock? What should they do rather than just, if somebody approaches them and, hey, I want to give a gift of stock, and they go, oh, I don't know. Well, that giver might not want to give anymore because you're scratching your head. On the other side, you might be able to bring that up and say, hey, we're prepared for this. And that might actually bring to someone's attention, oh, actually, tax season's about to, the tax year's about to finish up. That would be a great opportunity. Yeah. So I think both sides of those things you need to be prepared for.
Yeah. 2 things come to mind when you think about that. Number 1 is the preparation for it. Are you prepared to accept stock donations? Well, if you're not really prepared for it in a good way that you can communicate well, your systems are set up, it's ease of use, then I would go to the white glove treatment. And the white glove treatment is where you would get a broker. Fidelity, Morgan Stanley, Wells Fargo, Chase, all this kind of stuff. They do what they call brokerage services. And they'll usually have a form that you fill out. And somebody comes to you and they say, I want to give stock, right? And you're like, oh, okay, we have this form that we fill out, or we'll connect you with our broker. That's a sort of a white glove. You're sort of like trying to walk them through the process. But again, you got to look at the price tag. You got to look at what it is, because there's some high fees. And there's some softwares that you mentioned that can help do that and lower the fees. I know the denomination that you're with, as well as we work with, they have their own donor advice fund. And it's extremely inexpensive, and it's very user-friendly. So just things you need to be looking through. And here, can I tell you why you want to accept stock? Okay, so let's say a person buys a stock for $10,000. That's the person. And then, but the stock goes to 100,000.
Praise God.
Praise God. They're going to give you the 100,000, and the church is going to get 100,000. Now, that person, whatever they get as a donor credit, that's not your issue. That's their issue. But hypothetically, they're going to exclude $90,000 of gain on their tax return.
Because otherwise, they're paying that $90,000 as income tax.
Correct. So
not the whole amount, but whatever their tax rate is.
So you never want a donor to liquidate stock and then give cash to the church. That's the dumbest thing in the world to do, because they'll pay tax on the 90,000 gain. They won't get all the 90,000, right? Because they have to pay tax. But the church, there's an exemption. that the church does not pay capital gains tax. So the church gets $100,000 of stock. That $90,000 of capital gains is non-taxable to a church. So you get the full 100,000. So you have to have stock in your portfolio of giving in a church some way. And that's the simplest way is get a brokerage account with a local broker. It's fine. Or get some software just like that donor management system. And now those donor management systems not only accept ACHs, credit cards, you can post your cash, your checks to it, but also build into it the stock donation.
Yeah, and I think the root of it is have a plan, and it could be any one of those things you mentioned, but knowing here's what I do when this conversation is brought up, or here's the path I go down, rather than getting caught, oh, I don't really know what we should do. I guess we could figure it out. Well, if you're going to receive a large donation, you want to show that you're good stewards.
Yeah.
And if you're a good steward and you're scratching your head, you're unsure how to receive a large gift, well, again, that's probably why they're not bringing it to you. And obviously, we want people to be obedient. We want people to follow what God is telling them to do. But also, we got to do our part on the other end of that. I mean, we could get into so much on donor advised funds, but I feel like we've covered a lot of different things.
You know what? Can I say one quick story about that? We had a church who came to us, never had a balance sheet prepared, never did a bank rec. They did their income statement. They were tracking all that. It's crazy, right? So we put together a balance sheet. They finally got an annual report to present to their membership. And they presented a real balance sheet tied out. They were telling them the whole circle of all the services we were doing, how we partnered with their internal staff to help them get up to speed and everything. Next couple of days, a person comes into the church office and goes, I've been waiting to see that you are stewarding the money, and I wanted to give a $5 million stock donation. How would I go about doing that?
Wow.
And he goes, I want to designate part of this. I want to designate it towards pastors' retirements. I want to do it towards sabbaticals. He started designating it, and it was all to bless the pastors in the church. It was a game changer, right? But all of that started from like, how do you prepare for all this stuff, right? How do you get your house in order? And I think what it is what God calls us to, and this is the whole idea that I wanted to start the firm about, is being that wise steward, right? And God is like, if you're faithful over what I've given you, I'm going to make you ruler over much. That's his job, not our job. I just got to get it organized, be faithful. And so that's an example of the stock donation that this guy, like, there's literally people in your congregation that have quite a bit of money. And it could be one or two or three people, but they're looking for those avenues to give.
God's given them that gift,
right?
And allow them to use that gift and to trust. And again, you don't have to be perfect at it, but I think having a plan. You mentioned designations. I do think that's an important thing if we're going to talk about kind of this guide to church finance. We don't do a lot of designated funds. We have kind of streamlined that. We teach this for those that were maybe jumping on this episode and thought it was going to be more on the fundraising side. We literally have a whole plan and generosity accelerators and all of our e-courses. And so if they are looking for how do I raise funds, how do I organize it that way, we have so many resources. But obviously we wanted to focus in this episode on the back end. But we have tithe and we have kingdom builders. And so our tithe is the local church. Yeah. We give the first 10% to missionaries. Many churches do that. But then 90% is what we live off of from a budget, from ministry operations, building operations, benevolence, outreaches, events, things like that. And then kingdom builders is our over and above the tithe. In terms of designations, I mean, I see a lot of churches that their back end system is so tied up because, well, that's designated and that's designated and that's designated. How do you, I mean, obviously you work with us who do tithe and kingdom builders. I'd say a lot of your churches probably are doing that or switching over to that model, but there are many that still don't. What would be something that you would advise, in your opinion, on designations? Are there traps to avoid? I mean, you can't just free up those funds and say, well, we're going to use those for whatever. I mean, if you allowed them to be designated, I think there's a legal distinction. You can't just do that. So how would you advise a church who maybe has a ton of money in a bunch of designated funds? And then the other side of that, how would you advise people to change it and to move forward?
Well, first off, it is true designations are by donor. So if you allow it, then you have to honor it. And that's very true, okay? There are some rules to get out of that. You could say like, hey, you can designate it, but like we don't accept designated dollars, and the board controls or the leadership controls everything that is how we spend money.
But that would have to be on the front end.
It's got to be on the front end before the donation is received.
You can't just 2 years later be like, hey, I know you designated this for the building.
Yeah,
but
you can't. And so that's all good. So the one thing is you got to organize it. What I find is that a lot of systems we go into, it's a one column income statement, meaning income in, expenses out, and they have all these little sections for like, oh, here's operations, here's missions, here's building, but it's one column. And then the pastor and everybody lives at the bottom line, the net income minus expense, right? And then you're like, wait, did you know that you should have in your building fund account $200,000? You haven't spent it for building. Operations has been going over budget. So ultimately, the way you have to look at things is sort of like buckets. You say, here's a bucket for operations, that's for tithes and offerings, missions, maybe building, whatever. How much of cash is in each one of those? Now, anything designated is typically a cash basis, meaning cash in, cash out. As you spend it, you use it.
From an accounting method.
Accounting method. So what we always call it is the available funds report. So it's total cash, everything in the bank, in the savings account, in your investment accounts, whatever you have as far as the funds is total funds minus anything designated. The total equals available funds. And I will tell you that most of the time when we get to a church, when we first step on the thing, the available funds is negative, meaning operating fund, the tithe and offering fund, has overspent, and what they're doing is spending designated funds they don't know,
which is technically illegal.
It is illegal.
It is if they don't replenish that? Or?
Correct. It's an internal loan, and so you have to repay it. Okay? I'm not saying you're going to go to jail for it because there's obviously a knowledge thing. So that's not.
But it's dishonest.
It's dishonest, and it's not good to your donors, right? I mean, you're not honoring what you're saying you're doing. And so, anyways, you got to repay that. Tithes has got to grow, and you got to stop spending. But you know that. So what I always say is an income statement that's by one column is wrong. You need to have a column that says for every type of fund that you accept. Now, we at River Valley, it's very easy to manage because we don't allow so many designations, right?
We know what's going towards kingdom builders. Right. We know what's going towards tithe, and we're going to budget off of that, and we're not going to dip over into those other places.
And so that's where we do it. They allow some designation within missions, a small amount, and we just pay those out at the end of every month, no matter what. But the kingdom builders will roll forward. We can track that at any moment and to any time on our weekly process. So,
well, I want to get to the last two here. I know people are like, we're getting the crash course. We're getting all the different things.
There you go.
We've kind of touched on this, but some churches, they don't have a budget at all. They just kind of are, well, whatever the Lord brings in, we're going to spend that. And if he doesn't bring it in, we're not going to spend it. Some of that comes with the real-time financial data, though. If you don't know what you're actually dealing with real time, but how do you advise churches on actually making a budget, knowing that there is a nature of, although I'm kind of joking about it, there's a truth to that. Mm-hmm. This is free will offering. Like it's not membership dues, although, here at River Valley, we believe in the tithe, we practice it, but at any point people can stop giving and, this isn't a contract. Tithes could be down significantly. There could be a bad year where people's incomes go down. That affects the tithe. You could lose a big giver in the church that moves to a different city or quits your church or for whatever reason. Yeah. So it is much harder to project and budget maybe than other companies. But on the other side, you probably have a general idea of how do you advise churches to go about budgeting, and then how far in advance should they do this? What would kind of be your kind of guidelines and best practices?
Yeah, so let's go with the example that they don't have a budget at all, and they're just sort of living by what's in the checking account. And literally, we've found churches that do that. They literally log on to the bank account every day to see the cash in the bank. And so that in and of itself creates such anxiety, right? For the minister, like it's just a bad week. It's just, oh no, what's happening, right? Versus like, no, it's every other week's going to be a bad week because of the way people get paid, their payroll, right? And tithes come in. So how would we start? Let's start with where we're at. Let's just start building the budget with the actuals in place. What is the salaries and benefits? What is the mortgage payment or the rent? What is the utility bill? Start with the actuals. And then I say you have to build in a component of faith in your budget. This is obviously without faith, it's impossible to please God, right? We believe that, right? We're Christians. We believe in the word of God. That's what it says. So therefore, guess what? If your budget doesn't have some form of faith in it, then it's already not a good budget because we have to build faith into it.
Yeah,
And
you're
now,
relying on yourself. Yeah.
I will tell you this, every church that I have, and River Valley is a leader in this, is the top line, tithes and offerings. We set aside 10% of that at the gross level. So we only live on 90, okay? That's above and beyond all the kingdom builder stuff that we give away, everything else. That's the 10%. We put that in a fund, and then that fund is distributed out to missionaries for monthly support, other activities, things like that. But that is holy. That's in our budget. That's in like the constitution and bylaws of this organization. And that should be where a church should ultimately start. You're like, well, I can't afford that. Well, then start with 2, 3%, start with something. Start with the goal of like, why don't we just start with the 10% goal and say, okay, God, you said you would provide. We want to do this. Let's provide. And then get it planted, start to do it. So that's the first thing I start with is I build up the actuals of where we're at. Let's get a real picture. And I feel like it's like this, like sometimes, and I think we'll get to this in the next question, but you got to know what you have, right? And if you don't know what you have, you'll never know where you're going. And so we got to know that. And that's the first thing. And then do that 10%, build in that faith budget, and then let God perform it. And then just steward back for it. I always tell my staff this, like, we don't need to spend one more dollar to serve one more person. We're a service-based organization. A church is a service-based organization. We just got to have community, right? And that's what you need. So you got to have people. You can't be so administratively burdened. So then we go through other things of ratios, like what's a debt ratio? Like what should you have as a mortgage payment compared to how much your tithes and offerings is?
Do you have a benchmark you usually recommend?
I would never go over 30% ever, and all facility costs, right? Because then you're going to totally like, and when I talk about facility costs, I'm talking about insurances, utilities, upkeep. It gets to be too much. Like if you won't have enough to pay people, you won't have enough for ministry. So then everything becomes anemic, right? We don't have enough staff. We don't have enough anything. Now, let's say you have a church that's got 50%, right? Okay, that's where you're at.
Right.
Guess what? Your tithe needs to grow.
Yeah, or you got to fight to get that down.
You got to fight to get it down.
Some tough decisions.
Right, tough decisions. Maybe liquidate some of the property, or sell part of the property to like a Starbucks and let them make that a revenue generator for you. You can go into agreements with them, things like that. So what I'm saying is, but start with where you're at. And if those percentages are not there, then work towards it. And guess what? It doesn't have to be a bloodbath. You can grow your way into it. Like you can just increase tithes and offerings. Mm-hmm. Oh, wow. What a novel concept. Let's do that. Right. But guess what?
Which is doing good ministry though. You know, it's not shaking down people. It's it's having people that trust you to say, this church is doing what the Bible says a church should do. This is a place where we want to grow our family, where we want to give our tithes to because we trust this church. You know, so I think sometimes it's like, well, just grow it. Well, no, doing good ministry, being great pastors. Again, that's not what we don't have time to get into what all those things are on this podcast, but I do think that sometimes, like, it's not a financial equation.
No,
it's a byproduct. We say that all the time. If someone has stopped giving to your church, that's a byproduct that they don't believe you're doing good ministry, or they haven't experienced good ministry, or maybe they are leaving the faith, or whatever it is. It's not, oh, we didn't have a good donor system. No, I mean, the amount of people that, I mean, even people in our church that still want to write a check. They like, oh, I don't give online. I want to give in person. I want to put cash in the bucket. Well, they're faithful. They're gonna do whatever they want to do or they're gonna do it however they need to do it because they're gonna give to the church no matter what. Right. Your system could be as bad as all bad, but they trust you. They're gonna go through the hoops. Now, you obviously don't want to make it bad, but I think that it's a discipleship conversation
for sure. If you need money, serve more people. Right. That's what Dave Ramsey said. That's a good way of putting it, I think, in his EntreLeadership thing. And during COVID. What's amazing about COVID, I don't know if most people know this, but we realize this at most of our churches. One of the top 10 donors stopped giving in most of our churches. Did you know that during COVID? And the reason why was because it was loose offering, loose cash.
Just cash in the bucket.
Just cash in the bucket, passing the bucket and people dropping it. It turns out that it's amazing how many people just give that way.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not really, I would call it true tithe, but it's just, I'm going to give something. This is what I got
Yeah,
to
they're
give.
moved. They want
Right.
to.
But
Yeah.
it adds up over time.
Mhm.
Right. So that's why I say, like, always, you want to give opportunities for that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
You know?
A couple, you
Mhm.
mentioned some of these percentages. Obviously, 30% is like a max, like never go over that from a facilities cost. From a salaries and benefits perspective, different size churches are going to have different averages.
Mhm.
But in general, do you have a benchmark that you would say for this size church, this size church? Obviously, economies of scale can help larger churches. Single site churches probably have a lower salaries and benefits than multi-site churches do. But is there a general benchmark where you say
Typically between 35 and 45% is what we see. 45
it's a healthy place to
is
be?
a healthy place to be. Yeah. The smaller churches are probably more like 35% because they have fewer staff, right? They probably have more of a mortgage payment too, because obviously multi-site there's a economies of scale, right, for administration and things like that. So the smaller church is having less in salaries and benefits and more in facilities because of the mortgage. But then as they pay that mortgage down, they can pay people more. Then I have some churches that are completely debt free, and they're paying 50%, 60% of their salaries, or salaries and benefits. But what I would say is 35 to 40% is roughly there.
35 to 45?
Yeah, because you're going to need like 10 to 15% for ministry,
Right.
for just general operations,
Yeah.
right?
Totally. Last mistake here, and we're coming to a close here. We're over an hour, but hopefully this has been beneficial to people. It's not bad. I mean, people,
Love it.
if they're still listening, they're interested. They're taking notes and putting this into practice. This last one I think is so important. The mistake is that letting the financial office dictate the church's vision. Now you're the financial guy, you're the person, but you're saying, hey, if you're letting me and my team and the accounting department, the financial dictate the vision of the church, that's a mistake.
Yeah.
Expand on that.
It happens all the time. Like, you get a bookkeeper, you get a finance person, and they're like, well, we can't do it. We don't know. And this is a true story. It's in the Bible, right? This isn't a parable. It's feeding the 5,000. Jesus said, hey, let's minister to these people. Let's feed them. The disciples like, what? We ain't got it. We ain't got enough food. What are we going to do? Jesus said, what do you have? The 5 loaves, 2 fish. I would have wondered if they would have said, well, we don't know. What Jesus would have said, well, why don't you go figure it out and let me know? So my job as the CFO, I don't want to be the CF no, N-O. I want to be the CF K-N-O-W. No. I just want to know the information that when the vision comes to the pastor from the Holy Spirit speaking to him, that we can say, well, this is what we have. Okay, so then, and it's funny, as the feeding of the 5,000, he didn't give them the 12 baskets to take away later. As they gave out, he blessed it, and it grew and it grew and it grew. And by the end of it, they still had 12 baskets left over that each person that served got one, so to speak. And I find that interesting that it's the faith journey, and especially in the stewardship, is always a process to how you walk through it. You never get all the money you need for the entire project at the beginning. It's always a faith journey. And so we find so many times that our pastor's like, well, they tell me I don't have the money. Well, of course you don't have the money. You never start with the money. You start with what you have.
Right.
But so many people don't know what they have. And then they don't trust the process because they're running a huge operations or even a church from the rear view mirror. And what I mean by that, they're looking at financials already 45, 60 days late, right? So they're constantly looking from the back. How could you drive a car at like 60 miles an hour, 75 miles an hour, whatever it is, from the rear view mirror? It's very difficult, right?
Yeah, you want the confidence in, no, I know where I'm at, and I'm confident where I'm at, and I can make the decisions. But also, I know when there's a gap, and I know when there's not a gap. Like versus just, again, crossing your fingers. Well, I hope 45 days when everything reconciles, we're all good. Yeah. Or I hope if it comes in. No, you need to have accurate information. Yeah. But I also think we talked about the faith component of this. If I could add a mistake, I think a mistake is thinking that we need to get more money in savings. And of course, there's a reasonable amount, and everyone's going to have a different amount. Churches that are debt-free might have a bigger amount than churches that are not debt-free. Churches that have a risk-averse lead pastor versus someone who's open to more risk. That a board, a risk-averse board, or vice versa. But I've heard churches that I mean, they have so much money. You look at like the Church of the Latter-day Saints. I mean, they've got hundreds of billions in their investment fund, right? And our goal is not to save money. Our goal is not to die rich.
Yeah.
Our goal is not to have a church that has so much money. Now, River Valley, we're a wealthy church in terms of we have a lot of buildings, we have a lot of assets, but we don't keep a lot of cash on hand by comparison to maybe other churches our size, because we want to get it into ministry. We're not here to die with a huge bank account.
Yeah.
And so I do think that that's a mistake that, again, most churches would find themselves on the other side of these 6 mistakes of, hey, we got to figure out how to get more. But once you get to that point as a church, I do think there's this natural hoarding greed that's just a part of our sin nature, that if you only rely on yourself and you have so much money in the bank to where you don't even need to pray anymore if the tithe comes in. You don't even need to trust God if it's, well, we got so much money. What do you need to do? We're a corporation that's got profit. No, we're not. Profit is not on our sheet.
Yeah.
Income so that we can do ministry.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's something that I just,
well, you got to ask yourself the question, what are you saving it for? The Antichrist?
Right.
Because if you believe in the return of Christ, eventually they're just going to.
Whatever your eschatology, it's going to burn.
Yeah, it's going to burn. So it's like, you got to ask yourself that question. Now, is there a good reserve to have? Sure. Maybe a gold standard would be like 90 days of emergency reserve, but then you have to identify what's an emergency. Keep our staff, keep 3 months of mortgage payment. Who knows? Emergencies are always different for everybody, right? And so you just got to ask yourself that question. But here's where I want to come back to with this question of the accountant, sort of the CFO or the bookkeeper trying to control. One is by information. So you got to have that process in place to where a pastor knows how to read the finances and that they're working properly, right? And so then that information now is to him and he can make the decision, right? Versus, and then I got to know as the CFO that I'm not the one on the hook for it. He is. But I'm here to help him. I'm here to help. I believe in the vision and I want to fight for it. And I'm going to do everything in my power, but I'm not going to hold him back. You got to understand, like, there's 2 parts to this, right? There, I know Pastor Rob will say it like this: there's the hands, there's the heart, and the head, right? And he's the heart, right? And I'm the hands. I'm telling him, like, do we have it? And then we also have an XP. He's the head. He's sort of thinking through architecting everything. But he's the heart. Pastor Rob's the heart. And that minister has to know that he's being supported, right? In that regard. And we all have to be on it. We have to be on the same page. And if you can't be, it's okay. You're not a bad person. You just don't need to be on staff. You need to resign. And that's okay too, because there's probably somebody out there else you can support and be there. But I find that so many times, and really what it is, it's not even the person that wants to control the pastor. That's just sort of the byproduct of all of it. It's really the byproduct that the system is horrible.
Right.
The processes are horrible. Nothing is there to support anything that gets you real-time information. And by the way, none of that now, everybody used to think like, well, if I could just be a River Valley and I could afford all the systems that they have, we could be the church that they are. Guess what? Technology and software as a service now has completely flattened that field. You could have the same servers that we run on. We use Google Workspace, right? All of the technology and everything is available at the church plant level. As a matter of fact, it's probably easier for them to start where they are versus where we started, where we were.
Yeah.
Right. And all those pitfalls can be gone.
Yeah.
So.
No, it's true. And obviously we've talked about a lot today. It's this guide towards church finances, mistakes here that people make. And I mean, what you said about letting the financial office dictate, I think there are pastors right now that might be listening and maybe they're convicted that they need to understand this a little bit better too. That they've been trusting their CFO or they've been trusting their bookkeeper a little too much. And I'm not saying that because they're wrong, the bookkeeper, but the pastor just, oh, you handle it. No, if you're the leader of the church, you need to have a responsibility. You can't put all that weight on the CFO or on the bookkeeper. Right. That's not fair either. And then vice versa. You can't be the one that tries to hide information or tries to give selective information at the board meeting to serve your own agenda. That's not your job as an accountant or as the CFO. Your job is not to serve your own agenda. It's to serve the agenda of the leadership of the church, And so I think it's such a great distinction. For those who heard this, and I'm sure, again, there's a lot of notes, there's a lot of application steps, but maybe they say, okay, I can do all this on my own. I'm super excited about it. I'm going to put it into practice. We love that. There's others that say, honestly, I'm kind of stressed hearing about all these things and I'd love help.
Mhm.
That is where you come in, and you're one of our partners with our network. You serve a lot of our network churches, are a
Yeah.
part of those 1,100. But what would you recommend them if they want to learn more, connect with you, connect with the team? Where would you direct them? We'll obviously put the links as well in the
Yeah.
description of this. But what would be their next step if they say, we want help in this area when it comes to bookkeeping, accounting, making sure we're getting our payroll right, budgeting, all of that stuff? Where would you
Yeah.
direct them?
Yeah, just email us at info@cheneyassociates.com. Reach out to our office. We have a couple business developers, we call them. Ultimately, they're people connected to church. One of them used to be an ordained minister and still active in that, but doing a great job. It just, what we want to do is one is bring knowledge to you. Sometimes the church says, we don't want to outsource it. Well, can you be on it? Like, that's okay. Because we still have to have somebody on site. So we could help support that person. We could give you a financial assessment to tell you where you're at. What are some systems that you should put in place? So it's not either like all or none. It's what we love. We call it collaborative stewardship. We will collaborate together to steward. And if you care to steward, we'll collaborate together. If not, then we won't. And that's okay. We'll just give you some information and we want to help it. That's our entire goal of our organization, is to help the local church grow in stewardship.
It's awesome. Well, you have helped our church. You continue to help River Valley, leading as our CFO. You help 1,100 plus churches, and you'll be at many of our network events, conferences, things like that. And so if they see you, they'll say, "Hey, I remember listening to that podcast," and hopefully learn more about you guys and be a help. And I'll say, even some of my friends recently have joined your team and they have enjoyed it. And you're building a kind of an all-star cast around there. And so I know that you're a blessing to many churches. You're a blessing to us, and I appreciate you.
Thank you so much. God bless.